My name is Marisol Vega, 22 years old. Professor Blackwood did not look up when I entered his office. Papers lay fanned across his desk like wings he alone knew how to use. His Harvard diplomas watched from the wall as if they were sentries. I stood on the rug that probably cost more than my first semester of rent and waited for the man to notice I existed. When he finally raised his eyes, it felt like stepping into a cold room. "Miss Torres," he said, tasting the name as if it were a wrong ingredient. "I am sure your father is proud you made it this far, but graduate school requires a different caliber of student." The word different landed between us. I had heard variations my whole life. Different neighborhood, different budget, different school lunches. I drew a steady breath. My research proposal was accepted. "That happens," he said, and the muscles near his mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Sometimes accommodations are made for diversity initiatives." My face went hot, then colder than the room. The diplomas gleamed. His pen clicked once, twice. He slid a file toward me with 2 fingers. "There is a challenge. Solve it by semester's end, and I will consider keeping you in the program." Inside the folder was a problem that had chewed up better-funded teams for 2 years. Engineer a protein that targets cancer cells with exquisite selectivity while sparing healthy tissue. Every prior attempt had failed, and the failures were not gentle. Entire semesters vanished into the lab drain, trying to coax nature into a cleaner answer. "You have 4 months," he said. "Do not waste my time if you cannot deliver." I carried the file out like it was a fragile relic and a bomb at the same time. In the hall, fluorescent lights hummed over the waxed floors my father knew better than most faculty did. I pressed the elevator button and imagined Blackwood closing his office door on the next first-generation student who would come after me. The doors parted. I stepped into the metal box and felt it carry me down through the floors, through the layers of this world that pretended it had no basements. That night, my tiny apartment smelled like burnt toast and ambition. I dialed Dad on his dinner break. I could hear a cart squeaking in the background and the hollow echo of the chemistry building. "Mija," he said, soft as always. "What is wrong?" I told him about the smile that was not a smile, the challenge, the way the word different had been used like a broom to sweep me out. He listened without interrupting, the way he always had when I brought him questions about homework, about Mom, about everything that did not fit. "You know I have been cleaning that professor's lab for 3 years," he said after a quiet beat. "I see what the students throw away, their notes, their mistakes. I also see what works." I turned to the file on my table. "He thinks I do not belong." "That professor never had to fight to open a door," Dad said. "You did. That is why you will surprise him." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because courage sometimes sounds like your father talking to you in a hallway at 10 p.m. "Okay," I said, "then I will surprise him." The next morning, I arrived at 6 and stayed until midnight. The lab grew used to my body moving through it like a tide. When the day students went home, the vending machine became my dinner host. Coffee stained my notes. Timer alarms stitched hours into a single long thread. Blackwood passed my bench twice a day, each time with something that sounded like advice but tasted like doubt. "Still here, Miss Torres?" he asked once, peering at my cultures. "You might consider a more realistic path." I kept my hand steady. I already chose one. But the work did not care about my words. It cared about conditions, stoichiometry, folding kinetics, the blunt will of molecules to do as they please. I spent the first month reading everything published on selective binding mechanisms, scrawling diagrams until my wrists ached. I mapped every failure. I circled patterns where approaches kept breaking in the same place. It felt like arguing with a locked door and hearing the lock argue back. At night, when the lab fell quiet, memory visited. I was 8 again, waiting in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic while Mom slept off another chemotherapy session. Dad mopped floors with a rhythm that made me think of waves, and I vanished into empty classrooms to read whatever had been abandoned. The night I found a ruined molecular biology textbook in a dumpster behind the science building, I carried it home like treasure. Waterlogged pages, broken spine. The words still worked. In 3rd grade, Mrs. Patterson held up my crayon drawing of a mitochondrion and asked where I had learned it. "From a book," I said. She bought me 2 more with her own money. Sometimes a door opens because someone who has a key notices that you are waiting outside. Back in the present, I stared at my whiteboard. Everyone had been trying to modify existing proteins and then coaxing them to behave more politely. The modifications broke function or made the proteins reckless. What if the starting assumption was wrong? What if I stopped patching old structures and started designing from scratch? I drew a new architecture with binding pockets tuned to markers that cancer cells carried like guilty fingerprints. If I could teach a protein to see those fingerprints and nothing else, specificity might become a property, not a miracle. I built the first design and handed it to the machinery we all trusted to produce our molecules. It chewed my instructions and spit out fragments, as if laughing. I tried again. More fragments. 2 weeks of carefully arranged failure. I sat at my bench one evening with a cup of bitter coffee and heard Dad's voice the way you hear a song from another room. Sometimes the problem is not your tool. Sometimes you must change your approach. The standard bacterial expression system was fast and familiar. It was also, perhaps, wrong for this fold. Yeast was slower, more finicky, more like dealing with a temperamental artist than a workhorse. It was also promising. I taught myself the protocols in a blur of manuals, consults, and small disasters. On a Thursday that smelled like ethanol and triumph, the gel finally gave me a band exactly where it should be. When I purified the protein and watched it in the presence of breast cancer cell markers, it behaved like it had been waiting to do this. The binding response climbed, clean and unmistakable. When I tested it against healthy samples, the numbers barely moved. 89% specificity on the first construct was not a miracle, but it was the first door that swung. I dialed Dad at 2 a.m. "It worked," I whispered, as if the molecules might hear me bragging and change their minds. "It actually worked." He laughed. Then I heard him crying. "Your mother would be proud," he said. "So am I." The next day I moved differently, not louder, just steadier. In the hall, I passed 2 students complaining about experiments. One called me a ghost because I was always there and never at the bar. I smiled without stopping. It felt accurate. Success changed nothing about the challenge. I needed to engineer more variants, to deepen selectivity, to test for off-target effects that could undo months of hope. I added a second column to my whiteboard labeled moving parts. Variables looked back at me like a crowd of strangers I would have to learn by name. Blackwood walked by again, slower this time. He paused, pretending to examine a poster on the wall. "There is a point at which persistence becomes denial," he said without turning his head. "There is also a point at which skepticism becomes fear," I said, and surprised myself with the calm of it. He left without replying. Later, as I headed to the autoclave room, I glanced toward his office. Through the small window in the door, I saw the blue wash of a computer screen left on. A reflection moved across it. A shadow. For a moment, I imagined the inside of his sent folder, the way people write more honestly when they believe the door is locked. I kept walking. I had an experiment to run, and not all doors should open at once. At night, the lab's refrigerators hummed like low voices holding a secret. I fed cultures, cleaned glassware, adjusted a pH that refused to sit still. I marked up my notebook with a finer pen so my future self could understand what my present self had meant. Outside, snow made the campus look expensive. Inside, I counted pipette tips and promises. Before I left, I rewrote a line on the whiteboard that had started as a question and was now something else. What everyone missed. I underlined it and drew a small box beside it. Then I took a breath, set the timer for the overnight incubation, and turned off the bench light. The glow from Blackwood's office spilled faintly onto the hallway tile by the time I passed. I did not look in, not yet. I had the shape of a door in my head, and I wanted to be ready when it unlocked. The next few weeks turned into a blur of data sheets, coffee stains, and silence. I stopped noticing the difference between day and night. The lab's fluorescent lights became my only sunrise. Each morning, I'd take the same slow walk from the dorm to the lab, past the statue of the university founder, past the banners fluttering about excellence, past the custodial closet where Dad sometimes left me a thermos of coffee with a note taped to it. "Keep fighting, Mija." I pinned one of his notes on the wall above my bench, right next to a sketch of the breast cancer protein that had finally worked. That little folded miracle gave me just enough confidence to go further. I began designing 2 more proteins, one for colon cancer and another for lung. Each carried its own secret code to break. The colon cancer markers were faint, almost shy. I built and rebuilt structures that refused to recognize them. My simulations crashed. Cultures died. Sometimes I stared at the screen so long I'd see phantom sequences dancing when I blinked. When I finally cracked it, 12 failed iterations later, it wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief so deep I could barely breathe. The lung protein was different, elegant, cooperative. I shaped it to not only target malignant cells, but to disrupt their ability to metastasize, to stop the spread before it began. When the first results came back, I laughed out loud. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The janitor emptying the trash gave me a strange look. By the third month, I had 3 functioning proteins, all showing over 85% specificity. It should have been enough. But enough was a word Professor Blackwood used for students he didn't expect to rise any higher. So I reached further. What if there was a way to build a universal detector, a single protein that could sense any type of cancer cell? No one had done it before. Maybe no one had dared. I started mapping the similarities among cancer cells, patterns of uncontrolled growth that linked them despite their differences. My wall filled with strings of colored yarn connecting printouts like a detective chart. Red for DNA replication anomalies, blue for signaling pathways, yellow for protein misfolding. One night at 4 a.m., I nearly fell asleep at my microscope. Then I saw it. All cancer cells, no matter the type, rely on one central mechanism, the molecular engine that fuels uncontrolled division. If I could target that machinery itself, not the surface, but the core behavior of mutation, it hit like lightning. I designed the universal detector protein in 2 weeks. My hands trembled as I fed the sequence into the synthesizer. When it finished, I watched it spin through the purification column, golden under the UV lamp. When I tested it across 17 cancer types, the data stunned me. 94% specificity. It recognized almost every sample, ignored the healthy ones, and seemed to learn from each exposure. I sat there until sunrise staring at the results. For the first time, I let myself imagine what Mom would have said. I whispered, "We did it," to the empty room. But that morning, as I left the lab, I heard voices echoing from down the hallway. Professor Blackwood was talking to another faculty member. His tone was casual, even amused. "The Vega girl is still wasting time on that ridiculous project," he said. "I gave her an impossible task just to prove a point." My heart froze. "What if she actually pulls it off?" the other voice asked. Blackwood laughed softly. "Please. Students with better pedigrees have failed. Custodian's daughter or not, she'll drop out next semester." I stood there in the shadow between 2 pillars, fists trembling. Every insult I'd swallowed, every night I'd worked while others slept, it all roared back at once. I wanted to confront him right there, but then I realized something. His arrogance was the one variable I could use. He didn't think I mattered. That made me invisible. And invisible people can listen, watch, gather proof. The next day I went to the library instead of the lab. I started digging. Department newsletters, graduate records, old research rosters. In 8 years, Blackwood had supervised 23 graduate students. Only 7 had graduated. 16 had dropped out. I listed their names. Then I started seeing the pattern. 14 of those 16 came from working class or minority backgrounds. The 7 who finished? All from wealthy families. I reached out to the names I could find. The first was Amelia Rodriguez. Her voice over the phone was cautious at first. But then the dam broke. She told me how Blackwood had assigned her a project on soil contamination, then spent months dismantling her confidence, telling her she wasn't analytical enough. She quit after 1 semester. "He made me feel like I was an idiot," she said, her voice shaking, like I didn't belong in science at all. Next was David Kim. His brother had cystic fibrosis. David had wanted to research genetic disorders. Blackwood switched his topic to fruit fly genetics. When David protested, Blackwood threatened to fail him. "I should have fought," David said quietly, "but he scared me. I just wanted to survive." Then there was Patricia Washington. Her mother had died of cancer while she was in the program. She'd joined Blackwood's lab to continue her mother's fight, just like me. Blackwood told her cancer research was too complex for someone from her background. He reassigned her to a side project about bacterial resistance. She left within months. "I process insurance claims now," Patricia said. "Every day I see the same disease I wanted to cure." When the call ended, I sat with my hands over my face. It wasn't just me. There was a system, and he was its gatekeeper. I looked across the hall toward his office door, always locked, always humming faintly after hours. He thought I was just another student. But now I had motive, and soon I would have evidence. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns in him. When he left, when he logged out, when Dad's shift overlapped with his hours. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, only that it would be there. Late one night, I called Dad. "I need a favor," I said. "What kind of favor, Mija?" "I need to know if Professor Blackwood ever leaves his computer unlocked when you're cleaning his office." He went silent. "Marisol, that could cost me my job." "I'm not asking you to break in," I said quickly. "Just to tell me if the opportunity ever comes." He hesitated, then sighed. "What are you doing?" "Finding proof," I said, "for everyone he broke." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard him say, "Okay, I'll keep my eyes open." As we hung up, I felt the first spark of something new, fear mixed with determination. The kind of energy you feel when you realize you're standing in front of the door you were never supposed to open. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to knock. 3 nights later, my phone rang at 11:04 p.m. Dad's name glowed on the screen. When I answered, his voice was low, almost a whisper. He forgot to log out. My pulse jumped. "You're sure?" "I'm in his office right now. The computer's on, screen wide open. You have 20 minutes before I finish cleaning this floor." I didn't even grab my coat. I ran. The campus was nearly deserted, the science building half lit like a secret. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum, every sound a small betrayal. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering, until I saw Dad waiting by the door of Blackwood's office. He looked nervous, mop still in hand. "You have to be quick," he said. I nodded, slipped inside, and closed the door behind me. The office smelled like polished wood and arrogance. On the desk, the monitor glowed with an open email window. I slid into the chair and began searching. What I found made my skin crawl. A spreadsheet titled Student Performance Metrics. Each name was ranked, not by grades, not by research quality, but by family resources, connections, and program suitability. Every student from a wealthy background was highlighted green. The others, yellow or red. Next to my own name, a note. Custodial background. Likely diversity admit. Assign difficult project to test limits. I scrolled further. There were tabs labeled Problem Students, Intervention Strategies, Notes, Private. Inside were files on every dropout. Amelia Rodriguez, Constantly Question Methodology, Erode Confidence. David Kim, Reassign Topic to Discourage Persistence. Patricia Washington, Too Emotionally Involved, Redirect to Simpler Tasks. It wasn't mentorship, it was psychological warfare. I took photo after photo, my hands trembling. Then I found a folder buried under layers of subfolders. Isabel Chen. The emails were years old. In them, Blackwood promised to help her publish a groundbreaking discovery in protein synthesis, something he called transformative. But as I kept reading, I realized what he'd really done. He had stolen her work. Her method for protein production, the one that had made him famous, was hers. He'd published it under his own name, won the Steinberg Award, and buried her in silence. When Isabel realized it, she'd begged him to let her defend her thesis. He refused. Then came the emails from university administrators, each one echoing the same phrases Blackwood had used. Concerns about her mental stability, allegations of fabrication, funding withdrawn. 5 years of research erased with a few sentences. The last email in the chain was from Isabel herself, dated the week before she died in a car accident. "You can take my career, but you can't take the truth. Someday someone will find it." I stared at the screen, shaking. "Marisol," Dad whispered through the door. "Time." "1 more minute," I said. I opened the sent folder. More emails. Blackwood coordinating with department heads, bragging about weeding out the unfit. I copied them all to my flash drive, printed key documents, and took photos of everything else. When I finished, I stood there for a moment, looking around his office. The books, the awards, the empty space where Isabel's name should have been. Dad slipped back in. His face was pale. "What did you find?" "Enough to end him," I said. He didn't ask more. We left quietly, locking the door behind us. That night, I spread the printed pages across my apartment floor. My little living room looked like an evidence board. Names, dates, arrows connecting tragedy to arrogance. For a long time, I just sat there. I'd wanted to beat him with science, not ruin his life. But now I realized he'd already ruined so many. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Morrison, the head of the department. When I entered her office, she smiled kindly. "Marisol, I've heard good things about your recent work." There's something you need to see, I said, setting two thick folders on her desk. She opened the first, my research results, diagrams, graphs, experimental data. These are extraordinary, she said. You've achieved what others thought impossible. Then I opened the second folder. And this, I said quietly, is what your colleague has been doing to students for nearly a decade. She read in silence. Each page seemed to drain color from her face. When she reached the file labeled Isabel Chen, she pressed a hand to her mouth. Where did you get these? She asked. Professor Blackwood left his computer unlocked, I said truthfully. My father was cleaning the office. He called me because he was worried about personal information being exposed. It wasn't the full truth, but it was close enough. This is horrifying, she said. We'll have to call an emergency meeting. These allegations, these documents, they could lead to criminal charges. I hesitated. I want one thing first. She looked up. What's that? I want to present my research at the department symposium next week, and I want Professor Blackwood to be there. Her brow furrowed. You understand this could destroy him. He tried to destroy me first, I said, and everyone before me. For a long time, Dr. Morrison just looked at me. Then she nodded. All right, I'll make sure he's there. The investigation moved quickly. Within 2 days, the University Ethics Committee had seized Blackwood's files. They confirmed much of what I'd found, and worse. He had falsified data in multiple published papers, taken credit for student research, even sold experimental samples to pharmaceutical companies for personal profit. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The day before the symposium, I walked into the lab one last time. The machines hummed softly. My whiteboard still held the words I'd written months ago. What everyone missed. I thought about Mom, about Isabel, about every student who'd believed they weren't enough because one man said so. Then I opened my laptop and finished the presentation that would change everything. I titled the final slide, Truth Has a Half-Life. And when the day came, I was ready to let it decay right in front of him. The auditorium was overflowing. Rows of professors in dark suits, graduate students clutching notebooks, and even local news reporters who had caught wind of a breakthrough presentation. No one knew that by the end of it, the word breakthrough would mean something entirely different. I stood behind the podium staring at the crowd. The hum of conversation filled the air like static before a storm. In the third row sat Professor Blackwood, arms crossed, chin raised, expression carefully bored. He had no idea what was coming. Good morning, I began, keeping my voice steady. My name is Marisol Vega, and I'm here to present my research on engineered proteins for targeted cancer therapy. A few polite nods. Pens clicked. Screens lit up to record. 4 months ago, I was challenged to solve a problem that had stumped graduate students for 2 years, I said. Some called it impossible. I let the word hang in the air. Others thought I was incapable. Click. The first slide illuminated the screen. A diagram of protein structures annotated with the dates of each breakthrough. This is how the impossible began to unravel. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through every detail, the failed attempts, the yeast-based syntheses that turned the tide, the proteins that bound with surgical precision. Data charts glowed like constellations behind me. When the final slide appeared, 94% specificity across 17 cancer types, the room collectively leaned forward. This research has been accepted for publication in Nature, I said, my voice clear now, and the National Cancer Institute has invited me to continue development under full funding. Applause erupted, cameras flashed, but I wasn't finished. Before I conclude, I said, raising my hand, I'd like to acknowledge someone who made this work possible. The next slide appeared, a photo of Dad in his custodial uniform, standing beside a cart of cleaning supplies. This is my father, Miguel Vega, I said. He's worked at this university for 15 years. He doesn't hold a PhD. He doesn't even hold a degree. But he taught me what no textbook ever could, that perseverance can dismantle prejudice. Another round of applause, louder this time. I saw Dr. Morrison wiping a tear at the front row, but still, I wasn't done. I took a slow breath. Now, I said softly, I want to explain how this project came to me in the first place. The screen went black. Then words appeared in stark white font. Assign impossible protein engineering project. She'll fail and drop out within 1 semester. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I looked directly at Blackwood. Professor Blackwood, I said evenly, would you like to explain this note in your own file? He froze, color draining from his face. Miss Vega, this is highly inappropriate. Is it? I interrupted. Because I can also show the spreadsheet ranking students by family background, or the emails discussing which ones to discourage. The murmurs grew into a low roar. Every head turned toward him. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, rising halfway from his seat. This is defamation. I advanced the slide again. Images of his emails filled the screen. His own words, captured forever. A few professors gasped. Others began whispering urgently. Would you also like to deny these? I asked. Your correspondence with faculty members. Your ranking system? The file titled Problem Students? He stammered something, but his voice cracked. Students raised their phones, recording. It was too late. Then Dr. Morrison stood. Professor Blackwood, she said firmly, the university's ethics committee has reviewed the evidence Ms. Vega provided. Multiple investigations are already underway. The room went silent. Only the sound of the overhead projector hummed between us. Security has been informed, she continued. Your tenure is suspended effective immediately. The two campus security officers stationed near the back started down the aisle. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You vindictive little... Careful, I said, quietly but sharply. Everyone's recording. He froze. The moment stretched long and electric. Then one of the officers took his arm and guided him toward the exit. He didn't fight. He just looked at me with hatred, and something else underneath it. Recognition, maybe. The applause started hesitantly. One clap, then another. Then the entire auditorium rose. It wasn't just for the research anymore. It was for the truth. After the chaos, people surrounded me. Professors shaking my hand, students thanking me, journalists asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. But then, through the crowd, I saw three women waiting near the door. Amelia Rodriguez, Patricia Washington, and another woman I recognized from my research, Lisa Chang, one of Blackwood's earlier students. They walked up slowly, their faces trembling with emotion. We saw the news, Amelia said, tears in her eyes. We came as soon as we could. Thank you, Patricia whispered, for doing what we couldn't. Lisa handed me a small folder. These are our old research notes, the projects we had before he reassigned us. We want you to have them. I opened it. Inside were brilliant ideas, concepts far ahead of their time. I realized then that Blackwood hadn't just destroyed students, he'd erased discoveries. Don't thank me, I told them softly. Thank your own courage for surviving him. And if you ever want to come back to science, I'll help you find your way. Amelia nodded through her tears. We will. When they left, I stood alone on the stage, watching the technicians dismantle the projector. The seats were empty now, but the air still felt charged. For the first time, I let myself feel the weight of everything. Not victory, not revenge, just release. Blackwood's shadow had finally lifted, but the echoes of his cruelty would linger until every student he'd broken found their way back to the light. And I intended to make sure they did. The fallout came fast. Within days, the university issued a formal statement. Professor Blackwood's tenure was revoked. 12 of his published papers were retracted. The Research Integrity Board found falsified data, stolen work, and evidence of financial misconduct that spanned nearly a decade. The news spread like wildfire. Prestigious scientists accused of exploitation, plagiarism, and fraud. His name became a warning rather than a credential. But the part that hit me most wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet moments that followed, the messages from students I'd never met. Some thanked me for speaking up. Others confessed that they'd almost quit because of people like him. Then came the trial. He was charged with academic fraud, embezzlement, and defamation. The stolen grant funds alone amounted to over $200,000. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer. I just exhaled. Justice wasn't loud. It was steady. But the most powerful justice came later. The Steinberg Committee reopened its records. They reviewed Isabel Chen's original research notes, the ones I'd recovered, and confirmed what she had written years earlier. The protein synthesis breakthrough was hers. They posthumously awarded Isabel the Steinberg Prize and created the Isabel Chen Memorial Fellowship for underrepresented young researchers. Her family attended the ceremony. I stood at the podium to accept the award on her behalf. Isabel's mother, a quiet woman with silver hair, took my hand afterward. Thank you for giving my daughter back her name, she said. I could only whisper. She gave us all back our courage. After that day, everything changed. The National Cancer Institute funded my lab without hesitation. My proteins entered clinical trials across the country. The first patient, a 7-year-old girl named Sophia, had leukemia that no treatment could touch. 3 weeks after receiving the engineered proteins, her scans came back clear. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it redemption. Each success felt like restoring a piece of what Blackwood had tried to destroy, proof that brilliance can come from anywhere. 2 years later, the university invited me back to deliver the commencement address. I walked across the same campus where I'd once been invisible. Dad sat in the front row wearing a new suit. His eyes shimmered with pride. Beside him was Dr. Morrison, who smiled like she already knew the words I was about to say. When I stepped up to the microphone, the graduates grew silent. I once stood in this same auditorium, I began, feeling like I didn't belong. I was told that where I came from determined how far I could go. I paused, letting the hush deepen. But the people who try to crush your dreams are often the ones most afraid of your potential. I looked out at the sea of young faces, each one carrying a different kind of hope. So when someone underestimates you, I said, thank them. They just gave you the advantage of invisibility. The crowd laughed softly, then applauded. Afterward, as the graduates tossed their caps, a young woman approached me, nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. Dr. Vega, she said, I'm starting graduate school next fall. My advisor says I'm not ready for research yet, but I want to prove him wrong. Do you have any advice? I smiled. Never let anyone define your limits. And remember, people who underestimate you are just giving you time to surprise them. She laughed, shoulders relaxing. Thank you. As she walked away, I saw myself, the same fear, the same spark, and realized the cycle had finally broken. Today, I run the largest cancer research lab on the West Coast. My team's work has saved over 15,000 lives. Our engineered proteins are now used in hospitals worldwide. But the part that fills me with the most pride isn't the accolades or awards. It's the program we started 2 years ago, the Second Chance Scholars. Every year, 20 students from underrepresented backgrounds receive full funding to pursue advanced research. Some are the children of janitors, farmers, factory workers, people who've been told their dreams were too expensive. One of our scholars, the son of migrant farm workers, just published a breakthrough on drug-resistant tuberculosis. Another, whose mother cleans office buildings, developed an early diagnostic tool for Alzheimer's. Their work is saving lives. Their success is rewriting the story. Sometimes I think about Blackwood, sitting in his cell, staring at gray walls. He probably still believes the world is divided between the deserving and the disposable. He'll never understand the irony. His cruelty didn't destroy us. It created an army of scientists he could never control. That's the thing about prejudice. It forges the very brilliance it tries to suppress. Every morning, when I walk into my office, I see 2 photos on my desk. One of Dad, smiling, holding a mop beside the chemistry building that became our second home. The other of Isabel Chen, the woman whose stolen work taught me what truth costs and why it must still be told. They remind me why I do this. Because potential has no pedigree. Because brilliance doesn't ask for permission. Because the most dangerous person you can underestimate is the one who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. And I was that person once. Now I make sure no one ever has to be again.